Hello, and welcome to Soothing Pod's Sleep Stories. I am Arif, and tonight we journey into the extraordinary life of Hannibal, the legendary Carthaginian general whose daring campaigns reshaped history. From his early years in Carthage to his famed march across mountains and the Italian plains, we explore his strategy, courage, and enduring legacy. Settle in and let his story unfold, a blend of history, reflection, and timeless inspiration, guiding you gently into a deep and restful sleep. Before we begin our journey tonight, let's take time to relax and let go of the stresses of the day. Here and now, there are no obligations, no to-do lists. By simply lying in bed with your eyes closed, you are already giving your body nourishing rest. Close your eyes and imagine the soft shimmer of the Mediterranean at dawn, waves brushing the golden shores of Carthage. The air is warm and calm, carrying the faint scent of salt and olive trees. You can hear the distant stir of a bustling harbor, ships rocking gently as sailors prepare for the day. In this quiet moment, time stretches and slows, and you feel a deep connection to the land and its stories. Picture hills rolling gently into the distance, rivers winding through forests of pine and cedar, sunlight spilling over ancient stones. You walk beside them, feeling the cool breeze against your skin, the earth solid beneath your feet. Imagine distant mountains, their white peaks hidden in soft clouds, mysterious yet inviting, holding secrets of journeys long ago. In this stillness, you sense the presence of those who walked these lands before, warriors and travelers, strategists and dreamers. Their footsteps echo softly, not as a clamor, but as a quiet rhythm guiding you into reflection. Allow your mind to drift with these landscapes, gentle and unhurried, ready to follow the story of Hannibal, his journeys, his courage, and the legends that have lingered through time. The sun rose slowly over the Mediterranean in 247 BCE, spilling gold across the gentle waves that lapped against the bustling harbor of Carthage. Ships with sails of pale linen bobbed with the tide, their wooden hulls creaking softly as the salt-laden wind carried the scent of the sea inland. Olive groves spread along the rolling hills beyond the city walls, their leaves whispering faintly in the morning breeze, a rhythm as steady and ancient as the city itself. Among these hills and shores, Hannibal was born, a boy who would one day traverse mountains, rivers, and the imagination of generations. Carthage, in those days, was a city of trade, its streets alive with the hum of merchants, the faint ringing of metal, and the clatter of carts over cobbled stones. Spices from distant lands, grains from the fertile plains of Africa, and silks that shimmered like sunlight were exchanged daily. Yet life moved with a gentle rhythm, punctuated by the rise and fall of the tides. Hannibal grew among this calm, watched over by his father, Hamilcar Barca, who often took him along the harbor walls to study the ships and the men who sailed them, to observe how every journey was planned with care and precision. It was here, amidst the salt air and the soft sway of waves, that Hannibal first learned the weight of attention and the subtle power of observation. Hamilcar spoke to his son of duty and of the pride of Carthage, telling tales of distant battles and the delicate art of leadership. He instilled a quiet reverence for the land and sea, reminding young Hannibal that the world was vast and full of challenges that required patience, courage, and careful planning. The boy's eyes often lingered on the horizon, where the sky met the water, imagining distant lands he had yet to see. His small hand would trace the lines of the ships, imagining the hidden stories of sailors, merchants, and soldiers. And in those moments, the seed of ambition took root, gentle and steady. Some whispered myths, quiet as the rustle of olive leaves, spoke of Hamilcar making a pact with the gods of the sea to bless his son, though these were only stories, not history. They spoke of waves that would carry him safely across great distances and of winds that might bend to his will. Hannibal, even as a boy, listened with thoughtful eyes, not because he believed them entirely, but because the stories connected him to a world larger than the shores he walked. They were part of the air and the land, the subtle magic of imagination that filled every corner of the Mediterranean coast. The harbor itself was a place of quiet wonder. Docks stretched like wooden arms into the blue expanse, and seagulls wheeled above, their calls gentle, almost melodic. Fishermen tended their nets, and the rhythmic lapping of water against hulls created a steady, soothing cadence. Carthage's markets were alive, but never frantic, filled with the colors and scents of distant lands. Bronze coins clinked softly in the hands of merchants and customers, the occasional laughter of children floating like a gentle wind through narrow lanes. Hannibal observed these details as a young boy, learning the subtle ways in which cities thrived, how people moved together in harmony, and how power could be both seen and unseen. Beyond the city, the hills were dotted with farms and vineyards. Olive trees stretched in orderly rows, their branches bending slightly with the breeze, and wildflowers colored the slopes with soft shades of lavender, white, and pale yellow. Streams ran quietly through the valleys, reflecting sunlight in slow ripples, carrying water to the thirsty earth below. The mountains in the distance were high and mysterious, their peaks sometimes brushed with snow, a constant reminder that the world extended far beyond the familiar streets and harbor of Carthage. Hannibal would often climb the gentle slopes with his father, learning to read the land, to note the direction of winds, and to understand the flow of water. Lessons that would later guide him across rivers and mountains far from home. Life moved at a measured pace. Days were filled with lessons in reading, arithmetic, and the arts of strategy, but also with the rhythms of the sea and the markets, the soft patterns of the wind through the olive groves, and the quiet movement of tides. Hannibal's mind absorbed these lessons without hurry, finding delight in the subtleties of human behavior and the natural world alike. His father encouraged reflection, teaching that patience and observation were as vital as courage and strength. In the quiet of the evenings, Hannibal would stand at the harbor wall, watching the sun sink into the sea, feeling the cool breeze on his face, and imagining the endless possibilities that lay beyond the horizon. Even as a child, Hannibal understood the weight of promises and the strength of oaths. He saw that the world was not shaped only by force, but by foresight, by the careful alignment of intention with action. Carthage itself was a teacher, in its harbor and hills, in its markets and olive groves. The city taught him to notice, to plan, and to respect both the seen and unseen forces that governed life and ambition. In this quiet, natural rhythm, the boy who would one day march through mountains and across rivers learned the first lessons of strategy, not in battle, but in observation, patience, and the steady unfolding of time. As night fell over the city, the harbor dimmed beneath a soft glow of lanterns. The waves murmured against the shore, carrying a lullaby of the sea. The wind whispered through the olive groves, and the hills beyond were cloaked in gentle shadows. Hannibal lay beneath the stars, the stories of gods and the distant lands mingling in his mind with the tangible world around him. It was here, in the calm embrace of Carthage, where the rhythms of sea and city, myth and observation began to shape a mind that would one day move mountains and inspire both awe and fear. The hills of Iberia stretched in soft folds in 221 BCE, green and gold under the quiet warmth of the sun. Streams meandered through valleys, their surfaces sparkling like scattered glass, and the wind carried the faint scent of wild herbs and flowering shrubs. Among these landscapes, Hannibal began to gather an army, a force shaped not just by soldiers and weapons, but by strategy, discipline, and careful planning. Every march, every maneuver was measured, deliberate, a reflection of the lessons he had absorbed in Carthage: observation, patience, and the quiet weight of foresight. Carthaginian soldiers moved through the hills in orderly columns, their sandals stirring the dust of ancient paths, their banners catching the sunlight. Alongside infantry and cavalry, Hannibal introduced creatures few had seen before: elephants trained in the lands of North Africa, brought across the sea to join the campaign. These animals, massive and gray, moved with deliberate grace, their presence awe-inspiring to those who watched. To local populations and neighboring tribes, the elephants were more than beasts. They were symbols of power, shadows of distant lands, embodiments of a commander who would challenge the might of Rome. The sound of their heavy footsteps, muffled but steady, carried a quiet, undeniable message. This army was unlike any other. The soldiers' encampments rested beside gentle rivers and under the shade of tall pines. Campfires glowed softly in the evening, flickering light reflected in the eyes of weary but determined men. Hannibal oversaw the distribution of supplies, the careful placement of scouts, and the mapping of terrain, noting hills, streams, and fords, as if he were charting not only land, but time itself. The rhythm of the army's movement was mirrored by the slow sway of trees, the rise and fall of hills, and the quiet trickle of water, a natural cadence that made even long marches feel like a part of a larger, harmonious pattern. In these quiet valleys, myths whispered through the air. Some locals spoke of rivers that would choose the victor, of mountains that favored the bold and tested the careful. Hannibal listened with attentive eyes, not as truths to be followed blindly, but as stories that shaped the imagination and caution of those who lived alongside him. These legends blended with the tangible, maps, scouts, and careful planning, to form a strategy that was as much about understanding people and land as it was about confrontation. Through the days, the elephants continued to move with the army, their immense forms reflecting sunlight and shadow as they passed over hills and through river crossings. Soldiers tended them with care, aware that these creatures carried both practical and symbolic weight. At night, the elephants rested under trees, their low rumble blending with the sighing of the wind and the gentle lap of water against riverbanks. The animals were companions of the march, reminders of distant lands and the intricate planning required to bring them safely so far from home. The hills of Iberia were alive with subtle rhythms, birdsong, the rustle of leaves, the murmuring of streams. Yet these natural sounds were intertwined with human activity, as trade and diplomacy accompanied military preparation. Hannibal negotiated with local tribes, forming alliances and understanding the loyalties and customs of the lands he traversed. Each treaty, each careful word was part of the unfolding strategy, as important as the placement of men and elephants on the field of future battle. The lessons of Carthage, observation, patience, and reflection, guided his steps through these foreign hills, ensuring that every movement was deliberate, thoughtful, and informed by both land and people. Evenings descended slowly over the valleys, painting the world in soft shades of violet and gold. Fires burned gently in encampments, and the stars emerged above, twinkling through the clear night sky. Hannibal walked among his soldiers, his presence calm yet commanding, watching as the men tended to animals, sharpened blades, and prepared for the days to come. The elephants, resting beneath the trees, seemed almost part of the landscape, their forms steady and reassuring in the gentle hush of twilight. In the quiet of these nights, Hannibal's mind traced paths through mountains, rivers, and valleys yet to be crossed. He imagined the distant lands of Gaul, the passes of the Alps, and the rivers that would shape campaigns yet to come. Nature and preparation were inseparable, each informing the other. Streams hinted at paths for future crossings, hills suggested tactical advantage, and winds carried the whispers of change. Even the myths, rivers that chose the victor, mountains that favored the bold, reminded him that understanding the intangible was as vital as mastering the tangible. Through all these landscapes, Hannibal's army moved steadily forward, each day a quiet testament to planning, endurance, and foresight. The elephants, towering and patient, became part of the story carried in whispers among locals, symbols of ambition and distant lands. And as the sun set over Iberia's hills, spilling its light across rivers and olive groves, the army rested, the wind and water weaving a lullaby of the march, preparing for the journey ahead, over mountains, across rivers, and into history itself. The Alps rose slowly in the distance in 218 BCE, vast and silent, their snow-capped peaks glowing softly under the pale light of dawn. Clouds drifted through the valleys, brushing the slopes with delicate gray and white, while rivers, hidden beneath ice and mist, whispered faintly to the valleys below. Hannibal's army approached these mountains with measured steps, the rhythm of march echoing the subtle rise and fall of the terrain. Every soldier and every pack carried the weight of preparation and anticipation. The passes were narrow, carved between jagged rock and frost, their paths winding upward in gentle spirals. Snow clung to ledges and pine boughs, glistening faintly like scattered crystals. The air thinned with every step, cool against skin and hair, carrying the faint scent of pine resin and the distant, crisp tang of snow. Soldiers paused often to adjust, to watch the paths ahead, and to plan each careful movement. It was not merely a climb. It was a journey of patience, observation, and endurance. Among the soldiers, a few elephants remained, the massive beasts moving with deliberate grace. Most had fallen behind or been lost to the hardships of the long march, but the handful that continued carried a quiet reminder of distant lands, of ambition and daring. Their presence was muted, a gentle echo of the exotic force they once represented. At night, they rested beneath sheltering cliffs or beside trickling streams, their breaths steady and calm, blending with the murmur of snowmelt and the sigh of the wind. The human challenges were mirrored in the landscape. Rockfalls required ingenuity to overcome. Icy paths demanded careful footing, and frozen rivers demanded quiet observation before crossing. Hannibal walked beside his men, noting every slope, every bend, every stream, as if reading the mountains themselves. The army's progress was slow, unhurried, but purposeful. It was not speed, but understanding that mattered. Understanding the land, the climate, and the rhythm of nature itself. Legends had begun to form even as the army climbed. Romans and Gauls would later speak of Hannibal as one who had enchanted the mountains or called storms to hide his path. Tales woven from awe and imagination. Hannibal, however, was guided not by myth, but by careful planning, experience, and observation. Yet, in the quiet hours of the march, when the wind whispered through cedar forests and snow dusted the slopes, these stories seemed to mingle with reality, shaping the memory of the journey long before it was recorded in history. As the days passed, sunlight touched the ridges with gentle warmth, casting long shadows over valleys and cliffs. Streams glimmered in the morning light, their surfaces broken only by the careful steps of men and animals. Campsites were chosen near sheltered rock faces, beside clear water, under pine trees whose needles rustled softly in the mountain breeze. Fires glowed in the evenings, casting a warm, flickering light that mingled with the quiet hiss of melting snow. The army rested and moved in harmony with the landscape, learning its patterns, respecting its power, and finding calm amidst the challenge. Above, the peaks remained solemn and unyielding, white and gray against the sky. Winds brushed over ridges, carrying snow and pine scent, and the stars emerged each night, distant and steady. Hannibal traced imagined paths along these peaks, considering each step, each camp, each river crossing. Every decision was measured, deliberate, informed by the careful observation he had learned in Carthage and honed across Iberia. The mountains were formidable, but not insurmountable. By the time the army descended into the valleys of Cisalpine Gaul, the Alps had left their mark. Legs were weary, feet were sore, and the memory of wind and snow lingered. Yet, a quiet triumph filled the ranks. Soldiers would later recall the glittering peaks, the whispering winds, and the silent, vast expanse of mountains that had tested their patience and resilience. Night fell gently over the valleys. Fires burned softly, reflecting in the eyes of men and animals alike. The mountains, serene under a blanket of stars, seemed to breathe quietly, holding the memories of the march in their shadowed folds. Hannibal's mind, calm and alert, traced the routes ahead, rivers, plains, and hills yet to be crossed. The Alps had tested the army, but they had also taught it. And in the quiet rhythm of the march, the soldiers and their commander learned to move with both nature and strategy as guides. The Italian plains stretched before Hannibal's army like a patchwork of fields, rivers, and gentle hills. After the mountains, the land opened gradually, offering space for careful movement, for reflection, and for the planning that would define the next years of the campaign. The soldiers adjusted to the rhythm of the plains, marching in measured steps, their eyes following the subtle rise and fall of hills, the glint of sunlight on slow-moving rivers, and the paths that wound through distant towns and villages. In 218 BCE, at the Trebia, Hannibal's forces took up positions along the riverbanks and fields. Each placement of men reflected careful observation, the consideration of terrain, and a deep understanding of timing. Ridges, streams, and roads were all part of the strategy, each feature noted and employed with purpose. The soldiers moved as one, quietly adjusting to changes in the land, the soft sounds of boots and fabric blending with the murmurs of the rivers and the distant calls of birds. The following year, along the shores of Lake Trasimene in 217 BCE, the same careful attention guided the army. The plains and hills shifted with the seasons, rivers swelling from winter rains, the sunlight glinting off water and stone. Hannibal watched the land as much as he watched his men, reading each slope, bend, and clearing, preparing for movements when opportunities might appear. Even in quiet stretches between engagements, every decision, every placement reflected patience, foresight, and steady resolve. By 216 BCE, the army reached the open fields near Cannae. Here, the plains were wide and flat, dotted with olive trees and occasional groves. The sun cast long shadows across the earth, highlighting the contours of the land that would guide movements and influence outcomes. Hannibal's mind moved deliberately over these fields, adjusting formations, considering distances, and anticipating the flow of men and cavalry alike. Each day was a careful dance with the land, each night a reflection on the choices made and the steps ahead. Romans in distant cities whispered of his approach with unease. "Hannibal antiportus. Hannibal is at the gates," they said, recalling stories of his crossing of the Alps and the exotic beasts that had marched with him. In the countryside, however, the focus remained on coordination, observation, and the slow, deliberate rhythm of the campaign. Soldiers huddled near evening fires, tending equipment, sharing quiet words, and adjusting to the new lands. The gentle rolling of hills and the soft glimmer of rivers became companions to each step, guiding movements and offering calm amidst the steady passage of time. The seasons changed as the campaign continued. Olive groves shifted from deep green to the soft gold of late summer. Rivers reflected the shifting sky, and morning mists rose gently over the fields. Hannibal observed it all, noting each feature, anticipating every turn, and moving his army with patience. Communication flowed along the lines of men and messengers, coordinating movements between cities and forts. Even as the army advanced, there was a quiet understanding among soldiers. Every step mattered, every pause was a chance to observe, and every moment of calm could carry them further. Days blended into weeks and months, each marked by the careful rhythm of marching, observation, and reflection. Hannibal moved along the lines, speaking quietly with lieutenants, adjusting positions, and guiding movements with a calm authority. The soldiers responded in kind, moving in unison, attuned to the land and to each other. Olive trees, hills, and rivers became part of a quiet strategy, shaping each maneuver with a subtle, steady hand. By the close of the campaign, the plains of Italy had become familiar to Hannibal and his army. Each ridge, river, and road was known, each formation understood. The distant towns, murmuring rivers, and golden fields all held their place in the careful planning that had guided them for years. And as the sun set on another day, the army rested in quiet reflection, ready for the next move, guided by patience, endurance, and the steady mind of the general who had brought them across mountains, through rivers, and into the heart of Italy. After years of campaign in Italy, Hannibal eventually withdrew from the plains he had come to know so well, leaving behind the rivers, hills, and towns that had shaped his strategies. He traveled to foreign courts, a figure both respected and watched with caution. Even far from the lands he had marched across, his mind remained keenly observant, always noting alliances, opportunities, and the currents of power that shifted like a quiet tide. In exile, he moved between Mediterranean cities, speaking with kings and diplomats, navigating delicate negotiations with the same precision he had once applied to the placement of troops. Each meeting was measured, each gesture deliberate, and even in distant halls and palaces, Hannibal carried the calm patience that had guided him across mountains and plains. Messages passed between courts, treaties were considered, and decisions were weighed with care. The rhythm of diplomacy was slower than the march of armies, but it required just as much attention and insight. Through it all, the memories of Italy remained vivid. Hannibal would recall the flowing rivers, the golden plains, and the quiet coordination of his soldiers as they moved across unfamiliar terrain. He reflected on the challenges he had faced, the cities that had resisted and those that had welcomed him, and the enduring resolve that had carried him through the years of campaigning. In quiet moments, he considered the future of Carthage, the resilience of Rome, and the intricate dance of strategy that extended far beyond any single battlefield. Hannibal's final years were spent navigating both the political and the personal. He advised rulers, provided guidance to those who sought it, and measured every action against the long arc of history. Even as his health waned and the weight of time settled upon him, his mind remained sharp, aware of the currents of power and the lessons of a lifetime spent in motion. By the time of his death in 183 BCE, he had traveled far from the shores of Carthage, yet the echoes of those early days, olive groves, coastal winds, and the quiet harbor, remained with him, etched into memory as both home and beginning. Hannibal's later years were shaped by the careful navigation of foreign courts and the subtle balance of diplomacy. He offered counsel to kings, guided negotiations, and weighed the movements of powers far beyond his reach. Even in exile, He remained attentive to the world around him, measuring every decision and action with the same precision that had guided his armies. His life became one of observation and patience, a constant adaptation to circumstances, and a reflection on the enduring tension between ambition and prudence. Though the fields of Italy were behind him, and the battles fought long ago, Hannibal's mind remained engaged, ever aware of the currents of history and the delicate interplay of strategy, influence, and human choice. Hannibal's life illustrates the power of vision, guided by patience, courage, and foresight. He was not defined solely by victories or defeats, nor by the lands he crossed or the obstacles he overcame. His significance lies in the deliberate thought and careful planning that accompanied every decision. Whether navigating armies across mountains, negotiating in foreign courts, or observing the shifting tides of politics, Hannibal approached challenges with a balance of daring and prudence. He demonstrates that true influence comes not from impulsive force, but from the steady application of intelligence, careful observation, and the willingness to adapt. The crossing of the Alps, the coordination of his troops on distant plains, and the diplomacy in exile all reflect a mind that measured action against consequence, timing against opportunity, and courage against patience. These qualities allowed him to confront seemingly insurmountable obstacles and to leave a mark on history far beyond the immediate results of any battle. Hannibal's story also highlights the complexity of human ambition. He pursued a singular goal from boyhood, yet he learned in exile and reflection that persistence alone is insufficient without judgment, awareness, and the capacity to respond to change. His life teaches that resilience, intellect, and foresight are as crucial as bravery, and that enduring influence is measured in the impact of careful decisions rather than the immediate impression of audacity. In the end, Hannibal's legacy is a testament to the combination of courage, strategy, and enduring thought. It reminds us that challenges, whether in war or in life, are most effectively met with deliberate action, observation, and the willingness to adjust to circumstances. These lessons extend beyond history, offering insight into leadership, decision-making, and the quiet strength found in patience and reflection. His life stands as an enduring example that true mastery of any endeavor requires the steady mind, careful planning, and an awareness of both the world and oneself. I hope you enjoyed tonight's story and that it has brought you a night of peaceful, restful sleep. Please join me again tomorrow night for another sleep story. Until then, sweet dreams.